Greetings fellow gamers, I'm the Soulsborne Seeker and today I'll be reviewing Mars 2120, a science fiction Metroidvania game developed by QUByte Interactive and initially released in early access on the 27th of October 2022, before having its full release on the 1st of August 2024 for PC, Nintendo Switch, PS4, PS5, Xbox One, as well as the Xbox Series X and Series S. The game transpires during the 22nd century and thrusts you straight into the action as Sergeant Anna 13 Charlotte, a member of an elite group of space marines who is sent to investigate a distress signal sent from the first human colony on Mars after weeks of radio silence. Her spaceship ends up crash landing on the planet's surface, leaving her stranded and alone as she embarks on a mission to investigate the seemingly abandoned colony, in the process discovering the truth behind its downfall. The story is quite interesting and largely inspired by the often used yet always relevant concepts of human hubris and space exploration gone wrong, and is presented via audiologues scattered across the colony, as well as environmental storytelling and exciting cutscenes, the latter of which were a very pleasant surprise. The narrative doesn't reinvent the wheel or tread new ground by any means, but it keeps you invested as you try to piece together the puzzle that are the secrets hidden throughout this sprawling complex. Here, I do wish to make special mention to the protagonist, Anna, whose silent demeanor, futuristic suit, and badass combat skills brought to mind Samus Aran of Metroid fame, a mental connection I largely enjoyed. Moving on to setting, I'll admit I was initially worried about what to expect from Mars 2120, given that science fiction games often tend to go down the visually sterile route of presenting architecture and planets in quite minimalistic and bland ways, and for the first 20 minutes of my playthrough, I was kind of convinced this was the case here as well. That being said, I'm glad to report that the game's biomes proved me wrong, featuring much more diversity than I had expected by providing a truly interesting set of interconnected areas that actually made complete sense within the confines of a space colony. From the surface of the planet to the central labs, all the way to artificially forested areas and scorching foundries, the map does an incredible job of making each biome feel necessary for the harmonious existence of humanity on a faraway planet, in the process offering some very welcome environmental variety. Even the fast travel system is thematically fitting, taking the form of a series of underground tram stations which you can use to quickly move from one area to the next. Exploration-wise, the Mars colony has several secrets for you to uncover, which are divided into three categories, those being audiologues, experience orbs, and character upgrades, all of which are incredibly useful in their own way and make venturing off the beaten path a worthwhile endeavor. Audiologues provide little snippets of information relating to the narrative and do an excellent job of fleshing out the world in interesting and often creepy and disturbing ways. Experience orbs, as the name suggests, give experience points, which are the game's currency and are necessary for you to strengthen Anna via the acquisition of character upgrades, a collection of active and passive skills that you can purchase from a skill tree after discovering them first across the map, which are incredibly helpful and can make your life much easier by providing benefits such as faster shooting speed, more health, and increased melee damage, among others. The game does a great job of marking points of interest on your map by placing symbols for uncollected character upgrades, audiologues, as well as impassable obstacles you haven't been able to get through yet, and even marks your next story beat in the form of an exclamation point so that you don't get lost. Though all of these conveniences can be managed via a collection of accessibility options the game makes available to you so that you can tailor the experience to your specific preferences, a topic that I will expand upon a bit later. Staying a little more on exploration, Mars 2120 does feature some of the classic abilities you would expect, such as the double jump, which is actually immediately available to you, but largely chooses to take the elemental approach when it comes to ability gating. Essentially, throughout your journey you will acquire three different elemental affinities in the form of electricity, ice, and fire, between which you can switch at will, and with each one branching out to three sub-move sets of its own, most of whom are related to reaching previously inaccessible areas, such as dashing across gaps and through active cables with electricity, or creating solid platforms across water with ice, just to name a few. I truly enjoyed this approach and found it provided enough variety to exploration to keep it interesting. If there's one thing I would have wanted more of when it came to this aspect of the game, that would have been more platforming challenges. The game does feature a few nice acrobatic segments, but I would have definitely wanted some more difficult offerings in that regard. On the topic of combat, Mars 2120 features both melee and ranged options, and actually tries to go the extra mile a bit when it comes to its melee approach. In terms of ranged battle, Anna's weapon is dependent on your element of choice at any given moment, with electricity granting you an automatic laser rifle, ice a shotgun, and fire a flamethrower, each one differing in its approach in terms of range, movement speed, and shooting speed. Your ammo is infinite, though you do need to reload, something that happens passively once your firepower depletes. I have to say that ranged combat felt awkward at times in terms of aiming, since the movement of the weapon seemed a bit abrupt, something that made it a little difficult to hit some of the airborne enemies, though I can't say it ever evolved into an actual problem. Melee battle, on the other hand, is much more realized and features some interesting combos for you to pummel away at your enemies, with your movesets changing depending on the elements you have equipped, resulting in some fast-paced combos that tend to send your enemies flying and dropping down chasms or landing on other environmental hazards. I initially didn't really bother with melee since I felt that the ranged approach was much better, but eventually I not only realized that I somehow had more fun landing near enemies and beating the life out of them, but also that at times it felt necessary. For example, when fighting against enemies that shield themselves from ranged attacks, forcing you to get close and personal. Mars 2120 does have a good variety of foes as well as environmental hazards to overcome, though I'll admit I wasn't a fan of the fact that certain enemies were presented in different elements to provide more variety, something I always found to be a bit monotonous. The healing system the game incorporates relies on healing orbs dropped by defeated enemies, something that I felt raised the stakes of survival since, unless you were near a save point which also replenishes your health, you had to risk it and take down foes in order to recover or avoid them altogether. Overall, I did enjoy the game's combat, and admittedly that statement goes double for the bosses I got to face. When it comes to bosses, I'm happy to say that I consider them to definitely be the standout aspect of Mars 2120. Aside from a couple of them near the start that were a bit straightforward in their attack patterns, the majority of the big bads in this game felt like grand events, with many of them featuring multiple phases which were usually complemented by incredible cutscenes, including an intro video when first coming across each villain, as well as an outro video upon their defeat, which I thought was an amazing touch. Each boss features its own unique approach in terms of its attacks as well as your means to victory, with no two big bads feeling alike and quite a few of them requiring keen observation to determine how to actually take them down. This was one of those games where I just couldn't wait to see what the next boss was, and never felt disappointed by any of them, neither by battle mechanics nor visual presentation. Difficulty-wise, I'd say the game's default challenge leans on the normal side of things, with most of my deaths coming either from certain insta-death pits or from some very challenging boss fights. That being said, Mars 2120 does feature some very detailed accessibility options that allow you to make the experience as easy or as hard as you'd like, including turning on auto-aim, adding or removing pointers and icons from the map, activating color blindness mode, adjusting screen shake intensity, and playing around with modifiers for damage received and caused, among others. In terms of length, it took me approximately 6.5 hours to finish Mars 2120 on normal difficulty with about 90% completion, with an estimated additional 1 to 2 hours for 100% depending on your observation skills. For a price of about $20, it may come off as a bit pricey if you just want to finish the story without exploring, but I think it's worth its weight if you're a completionist or if you'd rather make the experience more challenging than its default settings of difficulty. Before we move on to my final verdict, I do wish to address some general issues that you need to keep in mind when deliberating whether you wish to purchase the game or not. First and foremost, Mars 2120 is a bit rough around the edges, something that probably becomes the most evident when it comes to some of its animations. Certain movements may come off as a bit clunky or abrupt, especially when it comes to enemy attacks. In that way, it kind of reminded me of Bloodstained, which suffered from a similar issue. Additionally, there were certain situations where I got stun-locked to death, which only happened with environmental hazards such as spikes and lava, making me think that the game would have benefited from some invincibility frames in those situations. I also came across a certain bug twice, which I believe was caused when I was in the map overview interface and attempted to click on it in order to see if I could place any manual markers, at which point the save game option suddenly appeared out of nowhere on my screen screen and didn't leave until I restored my last checkpoint, of which the game has several, thankfully. Finally, whenever I would go to activate a save point, there would be a 2 to 3 second screen freeze before I could see the resulting save menu. In conclusion, I truly enjoyed my time with Mars 2120. I was engaged by its story, I had a lot of fun with the combat, especially in melee, I adored the boss encounters, I found the elemental approach to exploration to be quite refreshing, and I was pleasantly surprised by the biomes as well as the presence of cutscenes. The game is definitely rough around the edges in terms of its animations at times, ranged combat could have been smoother, I could have done without the elemental swapped enemies for variety, and there were also the aforementioned stunlock and bug situations, but Mars 2120 more than made up for them with its solid core mechanics that establish it as an incredibly entertaining experience in the genre. My final verdict on Mars 2120 is 8 out of 10. What did you think about Mars 2120? Have you played it yet? Do you agree with the points I mentioned, or do you see things differently? Let me know in the comments below, and please subscribe if you enjoyed this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, Soulsborne Seeker out!